several members requested for this meeting to be recorded so that this could be used also within their network. So this is also the opportunity for me to make you aware that you will have the recording video of this meeting if you need it. You just have to request it by email to myself, and I will be happy to share it. Now, as I was mentioning, we have two speakers who agreed to share their experiences in using this advocacy assessment tool. First, Laurence Blattmer, who is the program coordinator at the Dominicans for Justice and Peace. Salut, Laurence. And then Pamela Difino, who is the project administration officer at the Maris Foundation for International Solidarity. So as I said, both the Dominicans for Justice and Peace and the Maris Foundation are members of the CCIG. We have been working together on different projects on the ground, aimed at empowering local actors to engage with the UPR. And in all these projects, the advocacy assessment tool was used. Beyond that, each organization has also used this tool for other countries and other their own projects. So I'm more than happy to give the floor first to Laurence, who will introduce the tool and also share a little bit of her experience in applying it to specific projects and countries. Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you, Maria. Greetings to everyone. I'm glad to see some familiar faces. So yes, I was asked by Maria to present a little bit the tool and also share some experience we've had with using this tool. So let me share my screen so we can look directly at the tool. I'm going to share with you the table on that I've used the last time. It was already back in 2022, actually, when I did use the table. It was for the UPR of Papua New Guinea. So, so briefly, that tool, we actually, the Dominicans, we did use a tool that was less developed than this one some years ago with some rating system. And then together with Maria and the UPR platform, we decided to, improve it. And this is, the most up-to-date version of the tool. So very briefly, you will see there are different pages in the Excel file. The first one is called relevant data. So I think Pamela will present it in details, but that's basically, in a nutshell, an analysis of the whole impact of our advocacy on the UPR. And then we divided the Excel with in different pages according to the themes that we have mentioned in our UPR report. So for Papua New Guinea, it was actually a joint project with the CCIG also, Edmund Rice, the Marist also. We had 4 issues in our report. So basically women's rights, children's rights, persons with disabilities, and environmental issues. So we decided to have one specific page for each theme. So that's how we decided, to divide this tool. So let me show you women's rights. It's actually the same structure for the other pages, basically. So if we go to the very beginning, I'll show you briefly how we've divided the tool, and then after I will share with you some positive points and maybe some other negative points that I found after some reflection about the tool. Yes, the first column is about the theme. So as I said, women's rights in this case. And then the second column is about the proposed recommendations. So those are the recommendations that we have made in our UPR report. So you can see the list here. This is for reference to make it easy to compare with the recommendations made by the states. Then after, you have here a list of the states that have been reached in alphabetical order. Yeah, that's pretty clear. We've consulted quite a few states with regards to PNG. And then another very important column is the manner we have, how did we reach this state actually? And this is very important because this is this gives us quite a good indication on the sort of advocacy we do and the impact it has, because looking a little bit at the table, we may have a higher impact when we meet in bilateral rather than just, sending out documents by email, for example. So the first way of reaching states is obviously organizing bilateral meetings, and we even divided it into two subcategories, the capital and in Geneva, because when we have the capacities, we try to organize advocacy also in the capital of the state under review. So that's those are the two subcategories for bilateral meetings. Then after, there is always the possibility to participate in the UPR pre-session of UPR Info. So here, when we participate in this UPR pre-session, we basically tick the box where the states that, with the states that have participated in this pre-session. There's also the European Union who is organizing a pre-session. It's more informal, and it's most of the time it is online, I think. So again, same thing. The idea here is to tick the box of those states that have participated in this UPR pre-session. So it's also a good indication for us if we do participate in the UPR, in the pre-session of the EU, to know which states were there and, who understood well our messages. And then the last possibility of reaching states is obviously doing lobby by email. If the people are, not available to meet bilaterally, then at least we send an email with the document. So normally we do send a report and a summary of the report, or at least a list of recommendations. And here we have divided it into two subcategories, because obviously we do have, normally we send to the Geneva, the delegation, but sometimes when we also have the contacts of the diplomats, we also send them directly. Or even sometimes that happens actually just this week. I'm doing advocacy on Dominican Republic. I've sent some emails to delegates here in Geneva, and some told me, yes, I've already shared your document to the capital staff in charge of the UPR. So there, it's good to know. So here we have the possibility to tick the box. So this is it for the different ways we can reach the states. Then after this, the other three columns are about the recommendations from the different cycles. Now, in a future UPR advocacy, we could add recommendations fourth cycle, because now we are in the fourth cycle. But here, so basically, let's take Argentina as an example. We have looked at the list of recommendations made by Argentina in the first cycle on women's rights. So we've done that study for all states that we have reached. And we've done the same for the recommendations made in the second cycle. And that's it, because the third cycle was actually the actual UPR that we were working on. Maybe just to let you know that some states have made several recommendations on women's rights. This is the case, for example, of Canada. So you will see that Canada have made in the first cycle, the first UPR cycle, 1, 2, 3 recommendations on women's rights. In the second cycle, they have made 2 recommendations on women's rights, and in the third, 1 2 recommendations on women's rights. And they are divided in the table because we wanted to make sure that the similar recommendations would be into a same line. So for example, taking this particular example of violence against women and children, well, we can find similar recommendations in the second cycle, and again, similar one in the third cycle. But Canada has made other recommendations on women's rights that are not necessarily linked to violence against women. For example, this one is hospital and rural medical services. So that's why we made it on a separate line. Same here, inviting the special rapporteur on violence against women, or even here, equality of men and women. So we decided to divide the recommendations according to the different focus. And so lastly, here, the recommendation of the third cycle, it was the relevant one for us because this was the PNG UPR was the third cycle. And that was actually important for us to analyze them because this is the ones that we needed to have to see the impact of our lobby, basically. So looking at Australia, for example, they have made a recommendation on the inquiry into gender-based violence and the progress implementation of the sorcery. And so basically, looking at our proposed recommendations, we saw that there was a really good correlation between what we had suggested and what they have actually made in terms of recommendation. And so for us, it was a rate of 1, knowing that number 1 is actually the highest, how do you say, the highest impact that we could have, meaning that our proposed recommendation and the one that they are suggesting, the state, is very linked to, is very close, very similar. The concepts, the words are very similar. So therefore, we believe that our advocacy had a high impact, meaning we put the rate number 1. And for example, Australia, we reached out to them by email. We didn't even met them. And this is why Australia is in green. So basically, it's just a code to help us very quickly see that this state, we're quite happy with the advocacy because we believe that our advocacy had a high impact on their choice of recommendation. So in this particular case, we can very quickly see that Australia, Canada also made similar recommendations to what we've produced. Ireland, Mexico. So you can see very quickly that there are already several states that have taken similar recommendations as our suggested recommendations. So this is more or less it. If you look at the lobbying impact, so the rate system going to the very top. So there are some blank cells. What does it mean? Well, it basically means that, for example, Algeria participated in the UPR. They have made recommendations, but they have not made any recommendations on women's rights. So therefore, we left it blank and there is no rate, no impact, basically. It's not applicable, let's say. Here, Argentina, they've made recommendations in the first and second cycle, but the third cycle, they didn't make any recommendations. Therefore, there's no impact of our advocacy. We didn't, it succeeded in lobbying them. So therefore, there is no rate. Here, Austria did not participate. So even though we reached out to them we even reached out to them at the capital, actually, but Austria did not participate in the UPR. So therefore, we left it blank because there is no impact on on them. There was no impact of our advocacy on them. So going to the very end, for example, so here, Bahamas, so we have reached out to them by email. They did not participate in the first 2 cycles, but they did participate in the last one, in the 3rd cycle, but we believe that their recommendation is not enough linked to our proposed recommendation. Therefore, we put a 0, meaning that for us, there is our advocacy had no impact on them, on their recommendation at least. So going down, we made a total here. It's the sum basically of all the different rates. It's 12.5. It is really an indicative note, and it's one of probably of my let's say negative comments of our table is that so far we have no indication of what a 12.5 means. Basically, it would be good at some point to make a comparison between different tables and different different states to see, you know, if, okay, maybe if we get a 2 in with women's rights in another state, maybe, you know, we can see, okay, PNG, we had a higher, you know, impact. But apart from that, 12.5, it's subjective, obviously, the way we rate the recommendations, and the total number is for now, we haven't really analyzed it. But so yeah, this is more or less it. And here it's the number of recommendations that have been made among the states that we reached, because it's important to note that the list of states here are only the states that we have reached, and obviously not all the states that have made recommendations on women's rights. So it's really to give us an indication of how many states, sorry, not how many states, of the number of states, the number of recommendations, sorry, that have been made. So for example, in the 1st cycle and the 3rd cycle, we can see that there were less recommendations than in the 2nd cycle. So this is more for a comparison. So I'm not going to go through children's rights, persons with disabilities, and environmental issues, because it's exactly the same format. But I wanted to share with you maybe some reflections in terms of the use of this table. I think a very positive point is you can see very quickly you get, you know, good visibility of our impact, but also of the level of participation of the states that we have reached. For as I said, some states throughout, you know, the different cycles have participated in one and not in the 2nd one, and they have participated in the 3rd one. And so very quickly, looking at the table, you get, you know, a good sense of, you know, the level of participation and also the trend between the different cycles. And I think that's super interesting. It's the first time that, you know, such a tool provides us with such a good visibility. Also, obviously, looking at the different ways that we reach states, it gives us, again, very good visibility on, you know, the different ways we reach the states and the different impacts. So I didn't really take time to analyze this, but it would be interesting to compare in the future maybe some evaluations from different organizations of different states and see if there's a trend. For example, can we conclude that when we reach out bilaterally in the capital, the impact is normally much higher than when we participate in the EU pre-session, for example, you know? And so this kind of table allows us to do such analysis, which I think is quite interesting. Another positive point is that it helps us a lot preparing the advocacy for future cycles, because, well, obviously we have the list of states that we've reached in past cycles, but also we can already have some good idea of what the state will do for the upcoming cycle. For example, here Switzerland has provided a few recommendations on women's rights for the first cycle. The second cycle, only one. The third cycle, only one. So we could maybe, make some analysis and say that for the fourth cycle, maybe their participation will not be that high, but they will probably still do a recommendation about SDG goal number 5 because they have, made such recommendation in the third cycle and something similar in the first cycle. So I'm just, saying that this table allows us to have a very good idea of of what states might do for the upcoming cycle. And I think that's also, that helps us a lot, to prepare very well for the advocacy. Some negative points, I've already mentioned this one about the total rating, which is difficult to analyze. We don't have any comparison with it. And the fact that it's also very subjective, the way that we rate our impact. Also, maybe something that we could improve our, it's more technical, but the number of states, I think, unless we calculate manually, we don't know how many states we've reached because the number doesn't fit with the lines. So maybe that's something, easy we could fix and make sure that we do put the number beside the name of the state. So this would allow us to very quickly see how many states we have reached who have made recommendations on women's rights, and the same for children's rights and other themes. What else? Yes, well, something that I observed, and that probably would be good to hear from the others, but it's quite time consuming to fill out this table. I realized that this one on PNG took me days to fill out because you have to analyze each recommendations from the 3 cycles. So it's quite some work. Well, obviously now, if we do participate in the 4th cycle of the UPR on PNG, the work will be done. So the only thing we will have to do is just to provide the recommendations made in the 4th cycle. But when you start from scratch, it's quite time consuming. So for example, I'm currently doing advocacy on the UPR of Dominican Republic. I'm not quite sure I will have time to, unfortunately, to do this table because yes, it's quite time consuming. So that's something also to consider also for our partners, for example, on the ground. Would they have time to work on such a tool? Even though it is very useful, yeah, we need capacities, obviously, to do this. Another negative point or point of reflection is our rating system, and that I think I told you already, Maria, in a call. The rating system, it doesn't really say whether our impact is real with a state that has already done similar recommendation over the past few cycles. So is our impact real or not? For example, I'm just giving a concrete example. Spain, no, not Spain. Let's take one that has a number 1, just to give you, okay, Mexico, for example. Mexico, we believe that our impact was high because we think that the recommendations they have provided in the 3rd cycle was very similar to what we have proposed in our report. But the fact is that recommendations can be, similar from one cycle to the other one, and maybe Mexico. Well, I don't know if that's the case, but maybe Mexico has done very similar recommendations in the past. So, is our report really has it really impacted the way Mexico drafted their recommendation, or is it only because Mexico has drafted similar recommendations in the past, and therefore, it is very likely that the recommendation will look like ours? So there it's a little bit of a gray zone, and I don't have like clear solutions on that, but maybe in this case, if, for example, we see that clearly, okay, we can say we had an impact, but was it as high as we think? Maybe it would be worth, putting a comment box besides the lobbying impact, and so that we can write, okay, there is a clear trend from Mexico that over the past few cycles, the state has made several similar recommendations. So maybe our impact is not, that high. But this we will never know if the delegates were influenced or not by our report. And maybe a last two last point. One other observation that I made is this rating system. So, for example, here we have many states that have made recommendations on women's rights compared to children's rights, or even people with disabilities. Here, not so many states have made recommendations. So therefore, logically, our ratings is much lower, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our impact was low, because it is well possible that, for example, Spain was very much impacted by our report and they've made a very similar recommendation. But just by the fact that there were less states, well, therefore our total rate number is obviously lower. But it doesn't mean that our impacts were lower than women's rights. I don't know if I make myself clear, but so that's something to bear in mind also. I think we need to probably correlate the total number with the number of states that have made recommendations. I think we have to bear this in mind when we do analyze the impact. And then finally, I think very positively, it's an excellent tool overall. I think the way that the CCIG and the platform has developed it, and I think it's a good tool to quantify our impact on advocacy, which is great because it's always very difficult to quantify the impact of advocacy, which I think many of you have already experienced, and so therefore it's good for fundraising, for example, or for our annual reports. And so I think, Pamela, you're going to probably talk a bit more about that. But that was my final comment. And I'm sorry that I took so much time, but yes, I hope it was clear. For those who have never used this tool, maybe it's a little bit confusing, but happy to discuss because there are some points that I'm sure we can improve in the future with this, group. Having this collective intelligence, I'm sure we can also share some inputs and experiences also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurence. You have navigated us to rediscover the tool, but you also pointed out a very technical and specific aspects. So maybe before I give the floor to Pamela, I would like to ask if there is anyone who has any pressing questions concerning what Laurence has just presented, because since it was very specific and technical, maybe there can be some questions that are better raised immediately. So maybe I can open the floor for questions, if any. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to continue with Pamela's presentation, and we will have anyway another question and answers space afterwards. Does anyone have a question?
Well, participants should be able to unmute themselves, okay, if you want to speak. Yeah.
Maybe we need to give them a few minutes to digest also. Huh?
Yes.
Maybe, Laurence, just one point I wanted maybe to react immediately before I forget, because it was a specific point. You were mentioning something that we were discussing over the phone, in terms of how truthful is how correct it is to assume that we have an impact on one recommendation made by one state during a specific UPR cycle when we know that the same state has already addressed a very similar recommendation in the previous cycle. So I see where your doubts lies, you see what I mean? And I share your concern. But after we spoke over the phone, I was, overnight, I was thinking through it. And at some point, I think that to some extent, it could not even be a real problem in the sense that it's true that, it's a fact that one state may have raised a recommendation in one cycle, but we know well enough because we have been following several cycles now. Huh? We are old enough, isn't it? So, and we know that there is no guarantee that a state can actually reiterate the same issues in the following UPR cycle. So on one hand, it's reasonable to assume that they would ensure some continuity between the priority, the thematic issues, and therefore the recommendation they raised in one cycle, and at least try to give a look and follow up in the following cycles. That's reasonable, but we also know very well that we have seen plenty of cases where one state can move abruptly from one topic to another, and the recommendations made to the same state from one cycle to the other could be also, totally different, diverge totally from each other, isn't it? So if we look at, based on this concrete experience we have, to some extent, we can also consider that our advocacy is impactful if we manage to secure the continuity between the two recommendations. Because if in a certain time when the UPR takes place, that human rights issue is there to the point that the state decided to raise it into one recommendation. And based on the experience of and the monitoring of our local partners, we see that 4.5 years after, the issue is still there and needs a follow-up recommendations. The fact that the state decided to be consistent and raise again the issues and hopefully be more specific in the following recommendations than the prior one, it is legitimate to stay to assess. I think that's just an idea, obviously to be discussed, but I think that it could be reasonable for us to consider it a success in our advocacy action because we have been able to contribute to secure that the state continue raising that issues 4.5 years later. Okay, it's always an interpretation. I understand that there is some, there is a certain degree of subjectivity in this kind of interpretation. So it's not the magic reply, but I just wanted to put on the table an additional reflection that in any case we know that it's that we are not the only actors playing a role. It's an international process, so we never have the certainty. We are never 100% sure that that UPR recommendation is the result of our advocacy action. So maybe we to some extent we also have to be a little less ambitious, but also be realistic on the fact that there are plenty of factors that can play a role, and the fact that if we are sure, because our partners on the ground tells us so, that that issue still deserves attention, and we manage to contribute to maintain the attention of the UPR working group on that issues, to some extent it's proof of some good advocacy action that has been undertaken. Maybe not exclusively by ourselves, but to some extent we have contributed to secure that kind of result. Just an overall, it just came into my mind because it's true that we had that conversation, and thank you for putting that in your presentation. I think it's very good. All right, so enough Maria talking. I also want to give a little time to the participants to see if in the meantime there were any questions. I didn't see any hand raised. However, I was speaking.
One raise.
Maria,
yeah. Maria.
Please. Go ahead then. Mara, please go ahead.
Unmute yourself, Maria.
You have to unmute yourself, Mara. Great, thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm Maria from APG23. Thanks very much, Laurence, for your presentation, for this useful table, as you call it, that I can see that it can be quite consuming to use, but it's a very important instrument, and we learn a lot. Now, I'm just wondering a few issues. One is the aspect if there is any point also in adding in the table or in the evaluation of the recommendation, the fact that the UPR submission has been included in the compilation of the NGO compilation of OSHR, which is also a tool that can reach the states in a way, no? And the other issue is the fact you were saying, as Maria also was underlined before, you are not pretty sure on the impact if the recommendation was really taken by from you or it was a similar recommendation of the states. But it can be also a similar recommendation made by other civil society organizations. I mean, not necessarily can be yours. In the panorama, in the landscape of the many organizations which are doing an UPR submission for that country, you know, there can be also similar recommendations and the similar advocacy carry out. So how we can further be more specific on this issue is difficult, I think.
I guess that would imply us to take a look at the different reports submitted online, but we don't know what is the lobby from the other organizations. Have they done the same thing as us? Have they contacted the same states? I think that's the whole issue, no? We will never know exactly if the impact is real or, yeah, if the states have been influenced or not by us. But I think we try as much as we can. But that's true. Actually, for the compilation, we should definitely include this maybe in the table. I don't know, Maria, if that's something we could work on with the platform. But I think, yeah, that's true. We should include it because, but again, how the difficulty is that which state will have read that compilation? That's also something we don't know. So how to measure this? That's another question mark.
Yes, I share what Laurence just said. Just to, I wanted to bring two additional elements of reply to what Mara just raised. So first of all, in terms of the impact of our UPR submission on the compilation of other stakeholders' contribution made by the OSHR prior to the UPR. So I do see their interest to look at that. And in fact, for instance, at the IMA-Invides, the NGO Data Agencies, what we do once the compilation is out, the summary of the stakeholder submissions is out, is to check how many times and related to which topic our submission is mentioned. And this is quickly done because you look at the documents in the footnote, you can quickly do that. We highlight the key points, and this is certainly therefore an internal evaluation that it's important for us. So I agree with you, Mara, on the fact that it's definitely something it's worth it to look at, especially since it doesn't take too much time to get a sense, right? Overall, however, I'm not sure if it's best. I'm not saying no, I'm just wondering here, sharing a little bit. I'm not sure if it's best to try to capture that element too into this advocacy assessment table, because at least when we decided to work on this tool, let's say the decision of the members of the platform was to the decision to work on this tool was based on one acknowledgement and one objective. The acknowledgement was to say that we knew that we wanted to increase our capacity to monitor and assess at our performance as NGOs in the UPR at so many levels, because there were indeed different levels that it's worth it to look at. And you raised, in fact, another one, right? But on the other hand, we were also aware that it was not possible, at least at that time, this was our assessment. It was not possible to create one tool that would allow us to capture the impact of every specific actions. And in fact, it was decided that the objective of this tool would be to focus on capturing the impact of advocacy actions undertaken after the drafting of the report in reaching out member states. You see what I mean? So it was the scope of, let's say, the mandate or the scope of the actions that the members entrusted the CCIG to look at. And it's true that the very first table was actually produced and elaborated by Dominicans for Justice and Peace, and they already provided a very, very good starting point. But all the work that we've been doing afterward has aimed at strengthening that specific aspect as requested by the members of the platform. So maybe if we decided to include new elements into this tool, we also have maybe to decide if we want to enlarge the strategic objective of the tool or if we want to keep it focused. And this applies not only to the point that you raised, but also on other points. So far, based on my experience, again, measure the impact of our submission on the compilation is quite easy to do, and so maybe it's not strictly needed to have an Excel files that tell us that, but I also want to stress that this tool is available in Excel as an Excel file that you can change. It's available for all the platform members, and if you or any other organizations wants to give it a try, to modify it and experiment and test new ways of using it, we would be more than happy as a CCIG to be kept informed and also to accompany you to think through it together. Because it's only one thing I have learned using this tool that is indeed very time consuming, is that only when you test it in a concrete case, you get a sense of actually what is the advantages of it, but also the limitations, and you find ways to try to overcome the limitations, which brings me to the second element of reply to your question. So how can we be sure again that it has been our advocacy effort that have led to that specific recommendation? I think honestly, and I want to make it clear, and I always announce it, even when we report to a donor or we speak with partners, I always put as like a premises of whatever exchange. I do not think that it's possible to have 100%, to be 100% sure that there is a direct and immediate relation of cause effect between what we do as our advocacy work and the specific recommendations. And to some extent, I think that it's right that is that way, because the UPR, it's not just our own exercise, it does not limit to our own field of expertise or our own NGO work, but it's meant to bring together different stakeholders, and we have to some extent believe that each of them contributes to some point. So I'm even let's say I gladly accept the fact that I do not have a strict control on all the process. That said, it happened to me when we were working, for instance, we were using this table for a project we ran in Bolivia in 2019. It happened to us that in that project we had several bilateral meetings of our local partners with embassies in the capital, in La Paz, but also here in Geneva. And I can see, while looking at the wording of the recommendations that were issued by some states to Bolivia during the UPR, I could see that there was such a strong correlation that it was almost impossible not to believe that our advocacy efforts and the meeting we had with the permanent missions had actually a strong impact on their decision to issue that specific recommendation. It doesn't happen very often, but I can testify that I found myself in the situation where the wording of the recommendations, the effort that the state representative put in wording the recommendation, clearly led us to believe that there was a very strong connection between what we had suggested and what they had finally addressed as a recommendation to Bolivia at that time. Again, it doesn't happen often that we are that lucky and that impactful, but in some cases, I think it's reasonable for us to estimate that there was a very strong connection. Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. I don't know if there is something in the chat.
Yes, in fact, Neha asked, she just wanted to make sure she understood, and I think it's good for everyone that I just clarify. So basically, we are, through this tool, we are measuring not so much the number of states who made recommendations, but rather if our proposed recommendations are aligned with what the state is recommending. So it's more in terms of the content of the recommendation that we are
The quality.
measuring rather than the number of states. Yes.
Thank you, Laurence, for keeping an eye on the chat. I see that Neha has acknowledged your reply. There was no other questions, right? So if so, I guess we are ready now to give the floor to Pamela, who will also share her experience, especially working on the first part of the first Excel sheet of the tool, where we actually take the conclusions about all the data that we insert into the tool. Pamela, thank you for joining us. You have the floor.
Okay, so I think it's the first time for me to meet all of you, so nice to meet you all. Let me share the screen. Okay, so as Maria already introduced me, I'm Pamela Difino, and I work for FMSI as Project Administration Officer. In addition to project management, I also carry out some activities related to human rights, or more specifically children's rights, together with Brother Angel Diego, that probably is more known than me. So in collaboration with the Secretary of Solidarity of the Maris Brothers. So together with CCIG, FMSI supported the Maris Brothers of Bangladesh in submitting this UPR report that was concerning some issues that are particularly concerned in the area in which the Maris Brothers operate. So the corporal punishment, child labor, forced child marriages, and access to quality education. So after we have submitted the UPR report, Maria introduced us the advocacy tool. So basically for me, it was the first time I work on it and the first time I saw it. So it was the first time that I approached this tool. So it was something rather new for me. So this was the file that I received and which I start to work on. So the sheet relevant, that is the one that I'm sharing, is the one in which I found some difficulties. So basically in my presentation, I would like to share with you some of the changes that I'd like to propose, and actually we have made working with the UPR report for Bangladesh. So at first glance, when I read a number of states who did not participate, I had no idea to which it was referring to. I was like thinking that I had to check among all the states members of the UN who were attending the UPR session. And I also thought that we could modify, or better to say, to separate for each of the topics that we are addressing, which are the recommendations made by the states that we have reached, and which are the recommendations made by the states that we have not reached. I'll try to show you the change that I propose, that maybe it's easier to get it. So basically, I find it useful to add number of states reached who did not participate. So the idea is just to make it clearer, the information that is required. I also think that this can give us an important information, because somehow it can tell us which are those states interested in some of the topic that we are proposing. So it's an information that could be also taken in consideration when we are following the UPR report and advocacy activities. Moreover, I found interesting also to add number of states not reached who made relevant recommendation, or actually recommendation that were similar to the one that we have proposed, because I think that it means a lot. Because, for example, it can give us the idea that we are addressing a topic that is important for the country under review, even though we didn't reach the state through our UPR submission. For the same reason, I thought to modify this part of the relevant sheet, dividing in between the recommendation made by states reached and by the states who are not reached by us, so by our UPR report. Because this allows us to see how many states, reached or not, made recommendation similar to the one that we have proposed. And so it helps us to see how much the issue or the theme that we are addressing is an important, relevant one, so a relevant issue or not for the country under review. And then this is something that is related to what Laurence said before. I thought that to better count which are the states that we have reached or not, it's better to modify the X with the number 1. In this way, it's much easier to count on which states we are reaching, and we don't have to count it manually, because this can we can make mistakes or something like that. So given that it's an Excel file, we can just put a number 1 and next to the states that we have reached through bilateral meetings, UPR pre-session, UPR session, or logging documents by email. So actually, these are just technical issues that we can take to better count the states that we have reached through the several initiatives. So basically, this change helped me in filling this advocacy tool in the right way, but most importantly, it helped me to extract the information that I needed to report to Ms. Ankara, and so to take the information I needed to report to the donor. Because actually, this project was funded by Ms. Ankara. It was a project for Bangladesh. The main sector of this project was educational. So we had a really small part dedicated to advocacy and to lobbying and to UPR. However, we had the opportunity to engage in some advocacy efforts, even though we had also some many funds to do it. So firstly, okay, here you can see the topic, the issues that we have addressed. So on the issue of corporal punishment, we can see that recommendations were few, actually only 1. But actually, it's important to note that the only recommendation that we have received was made by a country to which we have sent our UPR report. So this could give me the possibility, even though we have just saw that it's not 100% sure that the state made a recommendation only because we received our email. However, it can give me the possibility to show the donor that our engagement and our impact is important, because can shape the international discussion, or to make a recommendation similar or to some topics that we are concerned of. Secondly, regarding the child labor, our efforts have brought important results. So we can see that half of the recommendations were made by states that were reached out by our coalition, NGO coalition. And this gives me the possibility to report to the donor the strategic importance of the theme that our coalition addressed. And lastly, according to forced child marriages issue, we have achieved actually an important result because the majority of the recommendations that we have received were made by states reached by our NGO coalition. And it's, more importantly, as you can see in the screenshot that I'm reporting here in the PowerPoint presentation, two of the recommendations has some elements that were also in our recommendation. So we can say that, of course, as we saw, it's not 100%, but there could be a link between them. So to conclude, I would say that filling in this advocacy tool had a great impact on reporting, particularly this project to the donor, so to Ms. Ankara, because without it, the report would only have been about the training given to the brothers to draft and to submit the UPR, and of course to talk about the educational part of the project. But without it, the advocacy part, apart from the UPR report, we wouldn't have anything more to add or to say to the donor. So filling in this table, it helps us to give some important information and to collect critical information on the recommendation we have made, or broadly speak, of the UPR report that we have submitted. We have the opportunity to show the donor and give Ms. Ankara the chance to have a clear picture of which are the really relevant issues of the country under review and how we have addressed them reaching states, and in turn to have made recommendation on that issues. And lastly, to observe and later to report to the donor that some states that we have reached have made a similar recommendation to the one that we have proposed in our UPR report for Bangladesh. So basically, this was FMSI experience in working on the advocacy tool, and for me it was my first experience, so I totally understand Laurent when say that it's time consuming because it takes time also to understand the tool and to get into it. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, I think one element crucial that Pamela has raised, that is also maybe the main difference, Laurence, you tell me if I'm wrong, between the use that FMSI has done of the tool, but also and what we have done previously in PNG, is that and I know because I've been working with Pamela on the Bangladesh tool, so it was the result of some questioning. Basically, maybe the biggest difference is that we made the effort to include into the tool also information on the recommendations issued, so addressed to Bangladesh by other states, recommendations that were relevant with the recommendations of us and the NGO coalition, even if those recommendations were made by state who we did not reach out. So that's something that was not initially envisaged in the first version of the advocacy tool. And the reason why we did it was because this could possibly serve two purposes. On one hand, it can help to capture the how the UPR itself has addressed those issues that are relevant for our advocacy purposes, for our local partners, beyond strictly our advocacy actions. That is to say, if we consider child labor is a priority, if it's considered that forced marriage is a priority, for our members on the ground, it's important to know not only the result of their own advocacy effort, but also in overall what kind of tools they will have in terms of good recommendations, so to monitor and push for the advancement of these human rights issues on the ground. So the idea was to provide a tool that could provide more, offer more substantial information to empower our local partners in their follow-up. Secondly, this could also help us strategically to better target states that we would like to reach out in the future. And here I rejoin a point that Laurence was also raising, right? So how do we use this tool not only to capture in the short term how good was our work for this UPR, but also how this tool help us to better plan our future advocacy actions. And the idea of including other states that we didn't consider to reach out this time, but we see that instead they were interested on the topic and they made a recommendation on this topic, leave us with a good tip on how to proceed in the future, where we will continue our advocacy efforts. So this was the strategic point. And then thirdly, as Pamela has mentioned, the importance to quantify, especially when you have to report to donors who have invested some funds in this kind of actions. How do we quantify how important it is for us to quantify the result of our work? And even when we see that one data could not seem to bring any success for us, instead, when we compare to the overall picture, the bigger picture, we can prove that there is some added value. And the example that Pamela raised about corporal punishment. So we worked on corporal punishment, we addressed a certain number of states on corporal punishment, and then only one recommendation was made to Bangladesh on corporal punishment. One out of the total recommendations made by all the states, okay? So if we look only at our advocacy action, we could be disappointed. We invested energy and we got only one recommendation. So if we look at that, it's definitely not a success. But if we compare it with the overall picture, with the bigger picture, and we see that that recommendation made by one state that we reached out is the only one who is there, it means that this has a greater impact, because even if it's just one, at least it provides some basis for follow-up in the future. And if we had not made the effort, maybe we wouldn't have any recommendation on that topic coming out of the UPR cycle. So that was the interest for us to extend the kind of data that this tool could capture, and it's certainly an element for all of us to consider if this is a practice that could be replicated or not. And as I said, I reiterate the fact this is proof that this tool is something that you can, let's say, play with and try to exploit it to the maximum extent, depending on what kind of strategic objective you have as an organization. Planning your future work, advocacy work, report to donors, empower local actors, all those are considerations that will play a big role on how you use and change and adjust the tool in your daily work. I'm more than happy to take any questions that the participants may have. Hopefully we didn't scare them off too much.
Okay, just to come in over there. You know, Laurence, when you were showing the impact over there, you were showing the impact on states who have made recommendations that correlated to the recommendations that you had made. And then there are 4.5 years before the next cycle. So I'm just wondering, I think you referred to it, and Maria also referred to it, but could there be a column over there between the, say, the 4th cycle and now the 5th cycle that's coming up, okay, of what follow-up has been done, and what the state has has the state actually taken that recommendation and put it into policy or law or strategies or whatever? Again, it's huge work, I'm sure, you know, but like for our people on the ground, if they can sort of input into that particular thing, I feel our recommendation for the next cycle might be a little more stronger and effective and things like that. So anyway, just putting in that if you want, if anyone would like to respond to it. Thank you.
Well, maybe if I may, thanks, Tino, for that comment. I think indeed we are working on the UPR, not just for the sake of working on the UPR. In the end, we want concrete actions on the ground between two cycles. So it would make sense to really to also focus on this, on the different policies and laws that are taken or not by the state. So I think that I would see it more on our partners' side on the field to give us information. I think in any case, we do it informally. Myself, I do it with the different countries I follow, and I've never systematized it in in a summary in a table. We could allow some space in the table for that, but it would be obviously something to make sure that it's up to date. So it could be a little bit tricky because it becomes like a tool that takes on and more information. That's something I would say each organization could develop and do on their side. Yes, those are some comments. I don't know if Pamela or Maria have other comments about that.
Yeah, thanks, Laurence. Thank you.
Pamela, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, actually, no, I totally agree. I totally agree with Laurence.
Same for me. And again, I reiterated the fact that it's important to try to test it and see how, introducing such an additional element, how this would impact the tool, trying to counterbalance the fact that we want the tool to be as much exhaustive and useful as possible, but on the other hand, it also has to be manageable. So I think that's a criterion that also has to somehow lead us in finding the right balance. I also think that we should not exclude per se the possibility to have different versions of the tool, depending also on what we want to achieve, what is more important for us to measure in that specific UPR or in the UPR of that specific country. So we could even prioritize and look, that country along UPR cycles, or we could, as Laurence has also mentioned some point, decide to compare the trend throughout different countries, but focusing on one topic. So what was the trend on women's rights across multiple countries during the UPR? You see what I mean? So the idea of, and it's a point taken also, I take this opportunity to also wrap up a little bit. It's a point taken also what Laurence was saying, that the total rating that it now appears at the end of the column, it's just the data that's there, but it doesn't serve any strategic purpose. So we have it or we don't, it doesn't actually add or anything. So it could be worth it to see if it's worth it to keep it, but in which case we have to see how we can make the best out of it, or we just ignore it and say, okay, this is not something relevant, that it's worth it to develop at this stage, or for this specific country, for this UPR, for this project. You see what I mean? So we have tried to keep this tool as simple as possible, and it is already time consuming, as already reiterated, in order for to be as much manageable as possible, and also to be able to be adjusted to situations. So I don't know, Tino, if I really have replied, but I think that there is not one version of the tool that could reply to all needs. You see what I mean? So we have to, it was actually the purpose to provide the members of the CCIG with the tool that they could shape depending to their needs. And if as admin rights or if any other organization is looking into how to develop it in a different way, and you want to reach out to CCIG to give a look at it together, we are more than happy to try to, you know, typify maybe the tool and try to see how this can be adjusted. This could be one idea. Tino, do you want to add anything? Are you satisfied with your price? Pamela, please.
Yeah, if I can just add something. Yeah, for example, in our experience in FMSI, we have adjusted the tool because we have to report it to the donor. So that, for example, we have to make some adjustments to make more clear to the donor, to show them the result that we have reached. So I think, yeah, of course, it will be more than useful to have different version of the tool according to which information you have to get from it.
Yeah, I think also, thanks Maria for that, and Pamela as well as Laurence. I think the beauty of the tool really is that you can adapt it to your needs, and I think that's the real strength of it. And thanks for sharing it. Maria, I would have one last request, and that is when you're sending out the YouTube link to all the participants, if you could also send the tool to them, because many of them do not have the tools. Okay, thank you.
Yes, of course, and if you agree, I can share with you the two versions, so the one used for PNG, and if Pamela agrees, of course, we could also share the one of Bangladesh, where we made the changes that she presented, so that you can already have two different ways of, you know, at least for the first Excel sheet that takes out the conclusions and the data for analysis. I was also just, I would like to check if there is any pressing, you know, any urgent questions or any questions at all from the participants. I would like to prioritize that because we are just reached the end of the allocated time for this meeting. So I would prioritize that. Otherwise, one final comment and we wrap up. Any other questions first? I'm quickly going through all the participants to see if there is any reactions. If someone can double check the chat for me, this would be great. I don't see any other point. So
there's one, Maria.
Yes.
WEH.
Yeah, sorry, last minute reflection, but for instead of the total.
Marcus, hi. Sorry.
Yes, Marcus Hoffer from World Evangelical Alliance. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
I was just wondering, instead of just giving these total points at the end, why not maybe do an average over 1 from 0 to 1, and so in the table you had 12.5 points. Why not divide it by the number of recommendations made by states on the topic? Maybe this would give a better idea of the impact, but I acknowledge that this would mean ignoring those silent states who did not made any recommendations on the subject. But was just wondering if you thought about this average system from a scale from 0 to 1 and make a final average.
Laurence, Pamela?
Yes,
Laurence?
I think it's a good idea. In fact, we could have an average of, or maybe not an average, but like, you know, out of all those countries reached, how many, what's the percentage of the rate 1, and what's the percentage of the rate 0.5, and the percentage of the rate 0. So that would give us maybe a better indication. Then,
without losing information.
Yes, yeah, I agree. No, that's a good idea. Good
Thank
suggestion.
you, Marcus. Final question, very, very relevant. Now, feel free play with the tool once I send the Excel file and give it a try if you want. I don't know. We really hope that this meeting can also motivate some of you to give it a try, to apply this tool to your own advocacy work. This is also, and we look forward to receive your feedback if you have a chance to do that. I will have to wrap up. A few people already had to leave. Just one final thing I wanted to mention concerning the fact that filling out the tool is time consuming. Actually, this is something that also I was considering along the years, and I was wondering if it could be possible to turn to some IT expert and see if there is a way to systematize the way we insert the information into it. So move from an Excel file to another kind of format for this file where we actually can fill out the information in a more immediate way. I have no idea if this is possible, but I have been always thinking that it was interesting to look at it, and now listening also the concerns that you shared, I think that it could actually be even more interesting to give it a look. This is not knowledge that I have by myself, so I will have to see if I can identify one expert that could look at the tool with me, with us, and suggest some technical adjustment that could help to maximize and facilitate the filling out of the information into it, which I consider to be the most time-consuming, and also maybe some way to systematize the data that comes out of it. You see what I mean? So this is maybe something could be interesting. I will try to think of it. If you have the knowledge of any person as any IT specialist who could be worth it to consult for this, feel free to reach out to me. I will be more than happy to follow this up and see if we can find a way to minimize that weakness, okay, the time it takes to fill out the tool. Thank you so much to all of you. I apologize, we took 5 minutes more than what we had agreed. So a big thank you, especially to Laurence and Pamela, to accept to share their time and energy in putting together this meeting, to Tino for the technical support and also the substantial support. Thank you to all of you, and do not hesitate to reach out in case you are interested in receiving any follow-up information, including and we will certainly send to all the participants the recording of this session. A big thank you again, and have a good day.